Linda Matthews walked through Heathrow Terminal 5 on a cool Monday morning. She was a quiet woman in her 50s, wearing her favorite green cardigan and comfortable brown shoes. Her short grey hair was slightly messy from the long flight that had just brought her back from New York, where she had spent 2 weeks visiting her nephew James and his new baby daughter. The terminal was busy with travelers rushing to catch their flights. Linda moved slowly through the crowd, still feeling tired from the 9-hour journey. She had already passed through all the required security checks and was heading to collect her main luggage when a security guard suddenly stepped in front of her. "Ma'am," the guard called out loudly, "I need to see your documents again." Linda stopped and reached into her handbag. She pulled out her passport and boarding pass, even though the same guards had already checked these papers just 15 minutes earlier. Her hands shook slightly from surprise at being stopped again. "Is something wrong?" she asked politely, looking up at the tall young man wearing a black security uniform with a name badge that read, "Stephen." "Just routine," Stephen muttered, but his eyes moved up and down as he looked at her suspiciously. He flipped through her passport pages slowly, even though her visa was clearly visible on the first page. Then he called to another guard across the checkpoint area. "Tom, come over here. I need you to check this woman's bags again." Tom walked over quickly, and together they guided Linda to a metal table near the security line. Other passengers turned to watch the scene unfold. Some paused their conversations to stare. Others pretended not to notice but kept glancing over as they walked past. Linda felt her cheeks grow warm with embarrassment. She had traveled through this same terminal dozens of times before, but this had never happened to her. She watched as they emptied her small carry-on bag onto the table. Her favorite mystery novel came out first, followed by her travel tissues, some mints, and her spare reading glasses. The reading glasses slipped from Tom's hands and fell to the hard floor with a small crash. The left lens cracked down the middle. Linda winced but stayed quiet, not wanting to make the situation worse. "I'll need to check inside your cardigan pockets," Stephen said, still sounding official and unfriendly. "Of course," Linda replied softly. She pulled out a crumpled tissue and an old shopping receipt from the small coffee shop where she had bought tea earlier that morning. Tom continued searching through her bag. He pulled out her hand-knitted purple scarf, a gift from her sister, and unrolled it completely as if something might be hidden inside. He shook it roughly before tossing it onto the table. "I've already been through security screening," Linda said, her voice gentle but confused. "All my items were X-rayed just moments ago." "We'll decide what's necessary and what isn't," Stephen replied curtly, his tone sharp and dismissive. A woman with a bright yellow suitcase stopped nearby and watched openly. An elderly couple passing by shook their heads disapprovingly, but kept walking. A businessman in an expensive suit paused, took out his phone, and appeared to be recording the scene. Linda felt her hands trembling more now, not from fear, but from the unfairness of the situation. She had never caused trouble at any airport. She always arrived early, followed all the rules, and treated staff with respect. "Ma'am, please stand over here while we finish," Tom instructed, pointing to a spot away from the security line. Linda moved to where he indicated. She stood quietly, watching them examine her belongings item by item. Her favorite green sweater was pulled out and checked thoroughly. They even looked inside her empty sandwich box from the flight. Other passengers continued to watch, some with sympathy in their eyes, others with curiosity, and a few with what looked like judgment. Linda tried to ignore them all. "Are you traveling alone?" Stephen asked, even though the answer was obvious from her single boarding pass. "Yes," Linda answered simply. "Where were you visiting?" Tom joined in the questioning. "New York, to see my nephew and his new baby," Linda explained, still maintaining her calm demeanor despite her growing discomfort. They continued to question her about her visit, her job, and her plans for the rest of the day. Meanwhile, other passengers, including those who had been behind her in the original security line, passed through without any additional checks. Linda noticed a woman about her age with a similar build and the same type of carry-on bag walk. Right past without a second glance from security. The only visible difference between them was their skin color. "You can repack your bag now," Stephen finally said after what felt like hours, but had only been 15 minutes. Linda carefully placed each item back into her carry-on. She picked up her broken reading glasses, placing them gently between her scarves to prevent further damage. Her novel had gotten bent at the corners. Her tissues were scattered everywhere. As she zipped up her bag, she took a deep breath and straightened her green cardigan. She looked at both security guards and managed a small, dignified smile. "Thank you for doing your job," she said quietly, though they both knew the search had been unnecessary and unfair. Stephen looked away awkwardly. Tom at least had the grace to appear slightly uncomfortable as Linda walked past them toward the baggage claim area. Use a warm, empathetic tone. The end. 2 hours before the security incident, Linda Matthews had walked through a different part of Terminal 5. The morning sun shone through the huge glass windows as she headed toward the check-in area. Every few meters, she passed construction barriers painted bright orange. Workers in hard hats moved equipment and tools around. Large blue signs hung from the ceiling reading, "Terminal Improvement Project, thank you to our generous donor." Linda paused for a moment when she saw one of these signs. Her lips curved into a quiet smile. She adjusted her handbag and continued walking, her comfortable shoes making soft sounds against the polished floor. Few people at Heathrow knew the full truth about Linda's past. They saw a woman in her 50s walking through the terminal like any other passenger. They didn't know that she had grown up just 80 miles away in Birmingham, in a tiny flat above Murphy's chip shop on Station Road. Linda was one of 5 children. Her sister Mary was the oldest, then came her brothers Thomas and David, followed by Linda and finally little Michael. Their father had left when Michael was just a baby. Their mother, Margaret Matthews, worked 3 jobs to keep food on the table and a roof over their heads. In the mornings, Margaret cleaned offices in the city centre. She finished that job by 9 o'clock, then rushed to a factory where she packed boxes until 2 in the afternoon. Her third job was washing dishes at a restaurant 6 evenings a week. She only stopped when her legs ached too much to stand anymore. The family shared 2 small bedrooms and a kitchen, barely big enough for their wooden table. Linda often wore her older brother's clothes when they outgrew them. Her school uniform was passed down from Mary, with patches sewn over the worn spots. They had one winter coat that all the children took turns wearing. Many evenings, the electricity meter ran out of coins and the power would go off. Linda would continue her homework sitting near the window, using the light from the street lamp outside. She balanced her notebook on her knees and wrote carefully so she wouldn't waste the few pages she had. Her teachers at St. Andrew's Secondary School quickly noticed something special about Linda. While other students struggled with maths problems, Linda solved them in her head before the teacher finished writing on the board. She understood patterns and numbers in a way that amazed everyone. "This child has a gift," Mr. Harrison, her maths teacher, told the headmaster. "She should go to university." University seemed impossible for the Matthews family. The fees alone cost more than Margaret earned in a year. But Mr. Harrison and other teachers wrote letters recommending Linda for scholarships. They searched for every possible grant and bursary. When the acceptance letter arrived from Imperial College London, the entire family cried with joy. Linda had won a full scholarship covering tuition and even a small amount for living expenses. Still, it wasn't enough. Money for books, travel and food was needed. Linda worked nights at the same restaurant where her mother washed dishes. She cleaned tables and served customers, saving every penny. She also found a weekend job at a local shop, helping with inventory and restocking shelves. Despite her heavy work schedule, she kept her grades high throughout her final year of school. At Imperial College, Linda continued working part-time while studying computer science and business. She lived in the cheapest student accommodation available and often ate just once or twice a day to save money. Her brilliant mind caught up with the latest technology quickly. During her 3rd year, Linda created something remarkable. She developed software that used complex mathematical patterns to predict possible security threats at airports. Her system could analyze thousands of pieces of information in seconds: passenger lists, flight patterns, security camera footage, and more. "This is incredible," her professor, Dr. Robert Wilson, told her. "This could change how airports operate worldwide." Linda worked on her invention day and night. She improved it again and again, making it faster and more accurate. After graduation, she used her savings to start a small company called Secureway Solutions. She operated from a shared office space with just one computer and a phone. International airports soon noticed her work. They wanted her system. Orders came from Manchester Airport, then Gatwick, then airports across Europe. Linda hired her first employee, her brother Thomas, who had learned about computers on his own. The company grew rapidly. Linda's software became the standard for airport security worldwide. She traveled between airports, installing systems and training staff. Every hour she worked, every problem she solved, made her company stronger. After 10 years of tireless work, a large technology corporation offered to buy Secureway Solutions. The amount was staggering, nearly £1 billion. Linda accepted, but only with conditions that protected all her employees' jobs. Even with her sudden wealth, Linda kept living simply. She moved her mother to a comfortable house in Birmingham, but stayed in her modest flat. She quietly gave money to charities that help children from families like hers. When Heathrow contacted her about funding the Terminal Improvement Project, Linda agreed without hesitation. She remembered her first flight leaving for a business trip years ago, feeling nervous and out of place. She wanted other travelers to feel welcome and comfortable. The donation was made anonymously. Linda just asked for the signs thanking the donor, knowing her mother would smile whenever she saw them on her rare flight visits. She never needed public recognition. Her true reward was seeing the improvements she helped create, use a warm, empathetic tone. The end security had just called Richard Wilson's office phone. "Sir, we need you in the main terminal. There's a situation with a passenger that needs your attention." Richard grabbed his security badge and rushed out of his office, wondering what kind of problem required the terminal manager. As he hurried through the corridors, Richard's leather shoes clicked against the tile floor. He could hear raised voices before he even reached the checkpoint area. When he turned the corner, he saw a growing crowd of passengers watching something unfold. 2 security guards were searching an older woman in a green cardigan. Her bag was unpacked on the metal table, and items were scattered everywhere. Then Richard saw the woman's face clearly. He stopped so suddenly that a man walking behind him nearly bumped into him. "Mrs. Matthews." His voice came out higher than normal. His face turned pale and he felt his stomach drop. "What's happening here?" Linda Matthews stood calmly beside the security table. She looked tired but maintained her quiet dignity. Her grey hair was neat despite the long flight. She turned to Richard with a gentle expression that showed no anger or embarrassment. "Just a misunderstanding, Richard," she said softly. "These officers are doing their job." Richard knew Linda personally. He had worked with her when the Terminal Improvement Project began. He had sat in meetings with her, discussing every detail of the renovation. He knew she rarely mentioned her connection to the project, preferring to remain private. His mind raced. How could this happen? He pulled security guard Stephen aside while Tom continued to awkwardly gather Linda's belongings from the table. "Do you know who that is?" Richard whispered urgently, though several people could still hear. Stephen looked confused. He glanced back at Linda, then shrugged. "Some woman who looked suspicious. She kept coming back through the security line." Richard's eyes widened with shock. His voice dropped to an angry whisper. "That's Linda Matthews. She donated £500 million for this terminal's renovation." The words hit Stephen like cold water. His face went from brown to almost grey. His hands, which had been adjusting his security badge moments before, dropped to his sides. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. Tom overheard the conversation. He froze with Linda's scarf still in his hands. His colleague, James, standing nearby, took a sharp breath. The guards who worked this checkpoint every day suddenly realized they had made a terrible mistake. Richard turned back to Linda, his face filled with regret. "Mrs. Matthews, I'm terribly sorry." Linda raised one hand gently to stop him. The movement was graceful and calm, like a teacher quieting an overexcited student. "It's all right, Richard. Things like this happen to people who look like me, regardless of what's in their bank account." Her words were soft but clear. They carried through the terminal area. Nearby passengers who had been pretending not to listen suddenly turned their heads. Some had been recording with their phones. Others had been whispering to each other about what they were witnessing. An elderly man pushing a luggage cart stopped completely. A businesswoman waiting at the nearby coffee shop put down her cup. A young mother holding her toddler moved closer to hear better. Linda's simple statement made people uncomfortable. A few faces showed embarrassment. Others displayed recognition. They had seen similar situations before. Some shifted uncomfortably, knowing they had made judgments about people based on appearance themselves. "But I didn't know," Stephen mumbled weakly, though everyone heard him. "Exactly," Linda replied gently. "You didn't know, and that's the point." Richard's training kicked in. As terminal manager, he needed to handle this situation properly. But, as a person who knew Linda's story, he felt deeply ashamed. "May I help you collect your things?" Richard asked Linda, stepping forward. "Thank you, but I'm quite capable," Linda responded with a small smile. She moved to the table and began carefully placing her items back in her carry-on bag. Her hands moved slowly but steadily. She folded her purple scarf neatly, even though it had been roughly handled. She placed her broken reading glasses between soft items to protect them further. The watching passengers created an unusual silence. Usually the terminal buzzed with announcements, conversations, and the sounds of rolling suitcases. Now people stood quietly, observing what would happen next. A woman in her 30s stepped forward from the crowd. "I saw everything," she said clearly. "These guards singled her out, without reason." "Me too," added a young man in a business suit. "They let white passengers through without extra checks." More voices joined. Some passengers had noticed the different treatment. Others had felt uncomfortable watching, but hadn't spoken up until now. Richard realized the situation was growing larger than just one incident. Many eyes were on him, waiting to see how the terminal would handle this embarrassing moment. He glanced at the security footage cameras, knowing this entire scene was being recorded. "Steve and Tom," Richard said firmly, "return to your posts. We'll discuss this incident in my office after your shift." The guards moved away slowly, avoiding eye contact with everyone. The crowd began to disperse, though many people continued to watch Linda from a distance. "Richard," Linda said quietly, now finished packing her bag, "this really is all right. But perhaps it's time for some training updates?" Her gentle suggestion was wise and practical. Richard nodded, grateful for her grace under difficult circumstances. He escorted her personally to the VIP lounge, where she could wait for her luggage in privacy. As they walked away, murmurs spread through the terminal. People shared what they had witnessed with friends and family through text messages and phone calls. The story began to grow, spreading beyond Terminal 5 into the wider world. Use a warm, empathetic tone. The end. 20 minutes after the incident, Stephen found Linda sitting quietly in the airport cafe. She was sipping tea and reading her mystery novel, her broken glasses held together with a small piece of tape. Stephen had changed out of his security uniform and was wearing a plain blue shirt and jeans. He walked over slowly, his tall frame seeming even bigger as he approached her small table. His head was bowed and his shoulders slumped. Other people in the cafe glanced between them, recognizing both from the earlier scene. "Ma'am," Stephen said softly, stopping a few feet from her table. "May I speak with you?" Linda looked up from her book. Her expression showed no anger, only a gentle attention. She nodded and gestured to the empty chair across from her. "I'm sorry," Stephen began, sitting down carefully. "I was wrong to treat you that way. I shouldn't have—" He stopped, struggling to find the right words. His hands rested on the table, and Linda noticed they were slightly shaking. "What's your name?" Linda asked kindly, setting down her teacup. "Stephen, ma'am." Linda studied him for a moment. His brown eyes showed genuine regret. He reminded her of her nephew James when he was younger, tall, broad-shouldered, trying to do the right thing, but sometimes missing the mark. She saw something else too, the weight of carrying prejudices he didn't even know he had. "Well, Stephen," she said gently, "we all make mistakes. The important thing is what we do after we realize them." Stephen's shoulders relaxed slightly. He had expected anger, maybe even demands for him to be fired. Instead, he found understanding. "I grew up in East London," Stephen continued. "My dad's a police officer. He always told me to watch for suspicious behavior. I thought I was doing my job right." Linda nodded. Our families and communities shape how we see the world. But we can always learn to see more clearly. She paused, taking another sip of tea. An idea was forming in her mind. Stephen, I'd like to arrange something. Would you and your security team come to a special training session next week? Stephen looked surprised. Training? Yes. About unconscious bias and how it affects our work. Linda smiled reassuringly. I think it could help everyone understand why today happened. Richard Wilson, the terminal manager, appeared at their table. He had been looking for Stephen everywhere. Mrs. Matthews, I hope you don't mind if I interrupt. The airport board would like to discuss your proposal. Within the week, Linda had arranged everything with airport leadership. She worked with diversity experts to create a comprehensive training program. The first session was held in Terminal 5's conference room the following Tuesday. 20 security guards filled the room, including Stephen and Tom. Some crossed their arms defensively. Others looked curious. A few seemed worried they were about to be criticized or punished. Linda stood at the front of the room, wearing a comfortable blue dress instead of her usual casual travel clothes. Her voice was steady and warm as she began. I want to share some stories with you today. Stories that might help us all do our jobs better. She told them about her own experiences, how she had been followed in department stores as a teenager, with sales staff assuming she would steal something, how hotel clerks had questioned whether she could afford to stay there, how restaurant managers sometimes asked her to prepay for meals when white customers never faced the same request. These things happened even after I became successful in business, Linda explained. Even after I had money and status, because prejudice doesn't see bank accounts or achievements. Stephen sat quietly, remembering how he had searched her bag more thoroughly than others that morning. He began to understand the pattern Linda was describing. Linda continued with practical examples. She showed videos of different passengers being approached differently by security. She asked the guards to examine their own reactions and decisions. I'm not saying you're bad people, she assured them, but our minds often make quick judgments based on what we've learned growing up. The key is becoming aware of these patterns. During the lunch break, Stephen approached her again. I've been thinking about this morning all week. I keep remembering how I treated you differently from other passengers. Good, Linda said encouragingly. Awareness is the first step to change. The training sessions continued for 4 weeks. Every security team at Heathrow participated. Linda brought in other speakers too, psychologists who explained how unconscious bias works and people from different communities who shared their experiences at airports. Stephen attended every single session. He took detailed notes. He started noticing things he had missed before. When he returned to his security post, he observed his colleagues more carefully. One day, he saw his colleague check a young mother with a dark complexion 3 times while letting passengers who looked like him pass through easily. Stephen gently pulled his colleague aside during their break. Did you notice you checked that mother's documents multiple times? But you waved through that businessman without a second. Look, his colleague became defensive at first. She seemed nervous. Was she really nervous, or did you expect her to be? Remember what we learned in training? These conversations weren't always easy. Sometimes Stephen faced resistance, but he kept trying, remembering what Linda had taught them about kindness and patience. 6 months after the training program began, the airport received fewer complaints about unfair treatment. Passenger surveys showed improved satisfaction. Security incidents that required supervisor involvement decreased significantly. Stephen had transformed from someone who made assumptions based on appearance to someone who actively worked against bias. He became a mentor to newer security guards, teaching them what he had learned. He still made mistakes sometimes, but now he recognized them and corrected his behavior. During a break one afternoon, Stephen's supervisor, James, commented, "You've really changed since that incident with Mrs. Matthews." "We all needed to change," Stephen replied. "She showed us how. Use a warm, empathetic tone." The end 6 months had passed since that difficult morning at Heathrow Terminal 5. The spring sunshine warmed the glass walls of the airport as Linda Matthews walked through the main hall. Many things had changed during these months. The training program she created had transformed how security staff treated passengers. Word had spread beyond Heathrow to other airports across Britain. Manchester Airport had invited Linda to speak with their security teams. Gatwick had adopted her program immediately after hearing about its success. Leeds Bradford Airport was the 7th major British airport to request the training materials. The simple lessons Linda taught about unconscious bias were helping people everywhere. That particular Tuesday afternoon was quiet in Terminal 5. Most morning flights had departed and the lunch rush hadn't begun. Linda walked slowly through the terminal wearing her favorite green cardigan and the same comfortable brown shoes she had worn 6 months ago. Her grey hair was neatly brushed, and she carried her small handbag the same way as before. Near the coffee shop, 2 men stood talking while they waited for their flight. Linda overheard their conversation as she passed. "Remember how bad this place used to be?" the younger man asked his companion. "My brother-in-law travelled here monthly and got stopped every single time, just because of his skin color. That used to be the worst place for being stopped for no reason," the older man agreed, nodding his head. "But things are better now. My cousin works here as a security guard. He said they had special training that changed everything." Linda smiled quietly to herself. She didn't turn to join their conversation or tell them about her part in the improvements. She simply continued walking, pleased to know her efforts were making a real difference in people's experiences. As she moved toward the departure gates, she passed several security checkpoints. Things looked the same as always: guards checking, boarding passes, passengers putting bags through X-ray machines. But the atmosphere felt different. She noticed security staff greeting travelers with genuine smiles. They asked questions politely and explained procedures with patience. At the 3rd checkpoint, Stephen stood at his position. He spotted Linda immediately and stepped away from his post for a moment. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Matthews," he called cheerfully. "Flying somewhere nice today?" "Just a quick trip to Edinburgh," Linda replied with a warm smile. "How have you been, Stephen?" "Very well, thank you. I've been leading some of the training sessions myself now. New recruits really respond when I share my own story about our first meeting." Linda felt proud hearing this. Stephen had grown so much since that difficult morning. He had become an example to his colleagues, speaking openly about his past mistakes and what he had learned. A family approached the security line where Stephen worked. The father pushed a wheelchair carrying an elderly woman with a colorful headscarf. Stephen immediately moved to help, explaining the security process clearly and offering extra assistance without being asked. "This is much appreciated," the father said gratefully. "It's what we're here for," Stephen replied warmly. Linda continued toward her gate, watching more interactions like this. Guards helped confused tourists find their way. Staff members offered extra chairs to tired parents with young children. The security team worked together smoothly, supporting each other rather than competing. At Gate 27, Linda found a seat near the window. The boarding area was filling up with passengers heading to Edinburgh. She watched families, business travelers, and tourists settling in for their wait. A young girl with dark braids sat nearby with her mother. The child was coloring pictures in a notebook while her mother read a book. "Mummy," the girl suddenly said, tugging on her mother's sleeve. "Look at that lady." She pointed directly at Linda. The mother glanced up from her book, then smiled apologetically at Linda. "Sarah, it's not polite to point." "No, Mummy," the girl insisted. "She helped make things better here. I remember when we came before and those guards were mean to you, but now they're nice." The mother's face changed as she looked at Linda more carefully. Recognition dawned in her eyes. She had been one of the passengers who witnessed Linda's incident 6 months ago. "Yes, you're right, sweetheart," the mother said softly, turning to Linda. "She showed us how to make changes." The woman addressed Linda directly. "Thank you for what you did. My daughter and I noticed the difference during our last 3 trips through here." Linda nodded kindly. "We all have the power to create positive change." The little girl beamed at Linda. "She showed us that kindness is stronger than prejudice." "Mummy, that's what Daddy says," her mother agreed warmly. "That's exactly right." As boarding began for the Edinburgh flight, Linda gathered her things. She walked past the painted construction walls that still displayed "Thank you to our generous donor" signs. Workers continued renovating different areas of the terminal. The physical improvements she funded were nearly complete, but the changes in people's hearts and minds were the real transformation. Linda boarded the plane knowing her journey had created something lasting. That difficult morning had been turned into an opportunity for growth and understanding. The humblest moments could indeed spark the greatest changes. She had used her painful experience to educate others, transforming hurt into healing. From her window seat, Linda looked down at Heathrow as the plane prepared for takeoff. The terminal complex spread out below, busy with arriving and departing flights. Thousands of people passed through those halls each day. Now they were greeted with fairness and respect, regardless of their appearance or background. The pilot announced their departure and the plane began to move. Linda settled back in her seat, reflecting on how one person's choice to respond with grace rather than anger had touched so many lives. The terminal she had funded was filled with beautiful shops and modern facilities, but its greatest improvements couldn't be measured in money. It had gained new understanding, fresh perspectives, and renewed hope. As the plane lifted off, Linda thought about the universal truth that had become crystal clear through this experience. When we treat every person with dignity and respect, we create a better world for everyone. One act of kindness, one moment of understanding, one choice to see beyond surface appearances, these simple actions had the power to transform entire communities. The message would continue spreading like ripples in a pond, touching more airports, more cities, more people. Linda closed her eyes and rested, content with knowing that her humble beginnings in Birmingham had led to this, the ability to use her resources and experiences to make real difference in the world, use a warm, empathetic tone. The end.